Hello, and welcome to the pilot episode of what I hope will be an art podcast, where each week I bring on a different creative from my course, or any others that wanted to be involved, to chat about art. Each episode would surround the special guest, and we could be discussing the techniques and materials they use, their inspirations that led them to create, and why they make art, as well as maybe some stories that they've got to share. I hope our conversations will illustrate the current climate that we're living in and how lockdown has impacted their art practice. We're the leaders of the future, and I want to be a part of the movement to bring back the arts after the devastating effects of the pandemic. I aim to show the value of art and creativity and dive into the juicy behind-the-scenes gossip and tips and tricks that have come out of the studio in 2021. I realise that for me to start interviewing artists, I should probably introduce myself properly and give you a bit of an introduction to who I am, what I do, and how I got into art myself. But first of all, a little bit of a funny story. I struggled with what to call this podcast, but as I was sat outside the recording studio right before recording this first episode, I settled on the name Born to Create because someone told me that I was created to create, and it really made me realise that there was definitely something within me that had always existed. Maybe there was something that was born to create. However, in art school, our teachers tell us that nothing we will ever make will be original. And despite my initial joy at finding this title and thinking I was so cool and smart for thinking of something so catchy, upon Googling it, I discovered that a near identical podcast already existed from a far more established creative named Maria Katarina Richters. In the description of her podcast, it's described as, and I quote, "A podcast designed to help artists and aspiring creatives unleash their full potential and dare to start a life based on their art and their creativity." A mission that's ingrained within her since she can remember is that she always saw the potential in people. She saw beauty in art where they didn't see anything. As an artist or a creative, we've been brainwashed into the idea of the starving artist and have been shaped to respond positively to the expectations of others and lost touch to responding positively to our own inspiration and intuitive hits. End quote. I should really give this podcast a listen, because here I was thinking I was super original. But if anything, it kind of makes me happy knowing that other people are doing this, because it doesn't need to be just one person doing things. There's so many people in the world that hopefully this podcast can reach an audience that maybe hers didn't, and now they know about hers too. So definitely go check that one out if you enjoyed this one. I relate a lot to the way that she sees the best in people, because I know a lot of talented creatives who I would love to give the spotlight to so that they can share their stories and establish themselves as artists starting out in this industry. I hope I can bring an easy to listen to and uplifting podcast to your ears in these unsettled times. I'm sat here talking to myself in my bedroom, so bear with me as I ask myself a bunch of questions to help you, the listener, to get to know me, the host of this podcast, a little bit better. So where am I from? And how does that affect my work? My name is Chloé Smith. I am 23 years old, and I am a creative from London with both English and French roots. I value and embrace the paradox of strengths that both cultures bring me, despite them being very opposite in nature. The French side of me wants to start a revolution in response to the horrific injustice that's happening in the world. But the British part of me really doesn't want to bother anyone, and is more of a passive type of aggressive. I mean, yeah, it's rather confusing, I know. Welcome to my world. Internalized in my brain is very confusing. I also have ADHD, which means my brain is wired differently to the average brain that our society is tailored to. The creativity that stems from my neurodiverse mind allows me to ignore social norms and make art that confronts the viewer. So what journey did I take to get into art? As early as I can remember, there are photos of me painting and drawing. Growing up as an only child meant that I had a lot of time to myself, and I had a lot of time to fill in, so I would spend hours upon end doing painting by numbers or building model cars to keep me occupied while my parents did whatever they needed to do. My mother would hold felt making workshops in our home, so my childhood was very much immersed in making. I grew to be her assistant and eventually teaching the workshops while she assisted me by the time I was 12. despite her being questionable in a lot of ways that I won't go into. One thing my mum really succeeded in ingraining into me was the idea of making the best of any situation and having fun wherever you find yourself. I think this comes from the creativity that lies within us both, and our tendency to see the beauty and possibilities in everything. A distinct memory I have growing up is my mother finding lots of cool things in shops and teaching me to find inspiration in everything you see that you like in the world. You don't need to buy it if you can make it. She inspired me a lot growing up because that woman has zero shame, and as far as I know, there is nothing that she cannot do or hasn't done if she put her mind to it. She grew up in the heart of Paris with two brothers who would continue on to be a vascular surgeon and a physics researcher, and they stayed in Paris their whole life, married and had kids and stayed there. Whereas my mum chose to study chemistry and ended up with a PhD in organic chemistry, which allowed her to travel across France and Germany, Belgium, doing research for patents or translations for production and marketing purposes. She got married and had 2 kids, raising them all over the world. She ended up in Amsterdam, or her first husband was French-American, so she was in America for a while too. God knows. There's so much I don't know about that woman. But she did end up getting divorced and going to the UK, where she ended up testing viruses and vaccines in Scotland, basically doing another PhD in terms of the amount of research and things she had to learn in virology, before quitting the world of science to study art in London and marry my father to then have me. My dad was the youngest in his family and was born just after the Second World War. He also chose to leave his hometown of Birmingham to establish himself as a solicitor in London, leaving his family to stay and grow up and get married and adopt children in Birmingham. Before he attended law school, he travelled through Africa and has told me some insane stories of him travelling from one place to another by just sitting on the top of trucks, because back in those days, travelling was a lot different than it was these days. He really inspired me to go travelling myself, before settling into education too. Like my mother, he had also previously married and had a child before divorcing and meeting my mother, so technically I have 3 half-brothers, but they are between 15 and 18 years older than me, and I never properly lived with them. But I have developed an increasingly close relationship with them as I grew older, especially the youngest one, who is very similar to me in a lot of ways and I look up to and respect a lot. Being the product of the 2 black sheep of their respective families, and being left alone so much as a child, so I grew up so independently, has led to me being very different to everyone in my family, but I feel blessed to have such a rich background combined inside of me. Despite inspiring me to be creative, my mother and I had an increasingly strained relationship as I entered my teenage years. And despite me studying art at GCSE, she advised me not to study it at A-level, because in her opinion it was a lot of work and she wasn't sure I was up to it. Looking back, this really knocked my confidence. This was also the time where I got kicked out of ballet for not fitting into the costumes anymore. And all this turmoil was really reflected in the work that I was making. My GCSE artwork was soft and experimental, and I looked at fruit slices with ink and dancing and invisibility and illusion. In comparison, my A-level work was a lot more angry, and I can see now that it was a culmination of my relationship with my parents deteriorating, as well as entering an abusive relationship with my first proper boyfriend that I stayed with for 1 year and 7 months from the ages of 15 to 17, to escape the fact that I was bullied in school, so I didn't really have that many friends. I was traumatised into silence, and the pain from the anger inside of me clearly needed to escape, but didn't really know how to. I found comfort in the art room. I would spend lots of time there to avoid having to see people. I still talk to one of my old art teachers to this day, Yvonne Rankin. Absolutely bonkers, but so supportive and encouraging. She was a rock for me at school, where there really wasn't much mental health support, and if anything, mental illness was laughed at and made fun of. I didn't like the other art teacher much, but she saw something inside of me that needed to be released, and got me to throw balls of paint-soaked paper towels at the walls to add texture to my paintings, and maybe illustrate the feelings I was having inside to the outside world, as well as helping me release some of that anger within me. Those pieces were angry and aggressive, to say the least. Boy, was I a sad teen who just wanted to be seen, cared for and accepted. I ended up getting a B at A-level because life just started going downhill when my parents decided to divorce, and the stress of life taking over because I was still so traumatized and hurt from my school experience. I was stubborn because of it and wouldn't allow myself to be vulnerable anymore. But I had an unconditional offer to uni, so I didn't really care that much. My parents didn't really care what I did at uni as long as I went. So I found the first thing that I could do, and that turned out to be stage management. I mean, I got in with an unconditional offer, so clearly there was something within me, definitely the people skills, that got me that place at Birmingham City University, where I studied and was planning to do a 3-year BA, but ended up dropping out after a year. I learned a lot in that year though, and the biggest lesson was when I got top of the class in the creative module, and my eyes were opened and my soul validated to the possibility of me actually studying art, like I probably always wanted to before my mother told me not to, and my soul was crushed. It seems so silly now looking back that such a small comment had such a large impact on me, but it was clearly a lot of things, and illustrates the power of words and the need for people to believe in you. After dropping out, because I started having severe panic attacks and stress of knowing I was in the wrong place, I moved back to a new house in London with my dad in a completely different area from the one I grew up in. Everything was different. They up and sold the house the second I left for uni, and I never really got to say goodbye or acknowledge any of my childhood. I got a job with an agency, being a walking table in a suit that carried drinks and food to posh people at fancy events. I then got hired by a small fine dining restaurant, where I worked as a waitress in a small team for the next 4 months to save up for travelling. I was doing 70-hour weeks and sleeping on my days off. I really had no life, but I saved up enough money to go solo backpacking across Thailand, Cambodia and Vietnam for 5 months, followed by 2 months working in New York at a summer camp, 1 month of travelling around California, where I went on a road trip with a couple of friends, starting from San Francisco and going through Death Valley all the way to the Grand Canyon and back all the way to LA in about a week. We slept in the car. It's not the most glamorous trip, but wow, we saw a lot of things in that week. I then spent the month of October in Australia with my dad to visit my half-brother, his son, who moved there in 2010 after marrying his Australian wife. I guess 2018 was my gap year, but I managed to fit in 3 continents in 10 months, and I'm pretty proud of myself and will treasure those memories that I made while gone. Once I got back to the UK, I got a job as a waitress at a Japanese ramen restaurant called Tonkotsu, where I was part of the team that opened up a new branch in Ealing, before finally having the courage to apply to art school in 2019 at 21 years old. Luckily, I got accepted into Salford, and it took me a while to settle into making, because I was really trapped by my own mind. I remember on one of the first days in the studios, with all the other art students, a strong, confident lesbian girl, who was very confident in her sexuality, looked me up and down and asked me in front of everyone, "How about you, Chloé? Have you ever dabbled in vagina?" As I sat there shocked and a little flustered, I replied that I hadn't, but I'd never tried and didn't know how interested I was in women. Absolutely everyone sat in that studio, listening to our open conversation, was gobsmacked and in shock that I wasn't gay. I realised in that moment that I hadn't properly met a lesbian out loud who'd introduced herself as a lesbian to me until I was probably about 18, 19. Lesbians were a fantastical idea, and that seems ridiculous now, but it was, no one came out in my school, and it was very much shamed and made fun of growing up. Even my parents have slowly unlearned the homophobia that is rampant within society. But compulsory heterosexuality and all that, gotta love it. I realised in that moment that no one had ever told me they thought I was gay before. And my closet door was then unlocked for me to press shut and repress and hold closed for another 2 years. Despite ignoring the blatant gayness within me, I continued my first year by being a nude model and collaborating with a fellow student who I might actually be interviewing for this podcast in the future. We collaborated with body paintings and performances. I even dragged her across a canvas at one point, Eve Klein style. I solely made artwork about boobs, solely about boobs, while questioning why I was so obsessed with them. I wonder why people say art is a window to the soul of the artist. I was so in denial. COVID hit at the end of my first year, and I decided to move into my best friend's house for lockdown in Bolton, where I spent the next 3 months very isolated and had plenty of time to wallow in my thoughts and go deep into myself to understand who I was. I got diagnosed with ADHD in June of 2020 in the middle of lockdown through a WhatsApp video call at the ripe old age of 22, which opened my eyes to how I'd been masking for the benefit of everyone else in my life, and I had to take the time to reassess what I wanted and understand how my brain works, despite knowing from a very young age that my brain was different, and being repeatedly told I was normal and overthinking it, basically being gaslit constantly by my parents. Once I came to terms with my brain, I finally came to terms with my sexuality, and by accepting who I was, it was like I had finally released this unconscious need to make work about the female form. And my art practice took a radical turn away from nudity towards combining my love for dance and art. I came out as gay the day before my 23rd birthday this January, and my art has only gotten better, more cohesive and focused on rhythm and movement that has been intrinsic to my existence ever since. I've developed a much better relationship with both of my parents these days, who are both really committed to unlearning the societal norms that have been ingrained within them their whole life, and who have both been really supportive and encouraging of my art journey now that I'm here and doing well. My God, why do I struggle to say that? I am doing well. They tell me they're proud of me now, and I guess they're somewhat accepting of who I am, as much as they can be. This development in my practice is leading me down an exciting new path of creativity that embraces who I am and what brings me joy. I am a dancer, and I've been dancing my whole life. I've done everything from ballet to ballroom to folk to... I've done so many different styles of dance in my life. It's been truly wonderful to be exposed to so many different cultures at these international dance festivals that I went to. Before the pandemic hit, I'd be going to weekly modern jive classes and doing couple dancing and social dance multiple times a week. Growing up, I remember going to lots of folk dance festivals and sitting on the edge of the dance floors my parents would want to dance in, watching the classes and learning the moves by mimicking the teachers with my hands from pure boredom. This technique of learning came with a big bonus for a lazy preteen, because it meant I could learn most of the dances without even having to get up. Once I had understood the movements with my hands, I could do the routine on my feet, without having to stand around during a class learning the dance at a slow pace that my brain would just not cope with. Some might call this laziness, but I prefer to think of it as working smart. It was a light bulb moment when I thought to hold a pen in each hand and record the movement that they were making across a piece of paper. The turning point for my art practice was attending a virtual dance weekender this February, but I reconnected with that passion for movement that I had lost due to the virus requiring social distancing and partner dancing being banned. Line dancing became the only accessible style to me because I could dance them on my own in my bedroom. And luckily, a really close friend of mine had a repertoire of about 4,000 line dances, all printed out onto pieces of paper, that he spent a lot of time teaching me so that I could reproduce them on pieces of paper. So what inspired me growing up? I now realise how inspirational my mum was, but my dad also really inspired me to be sensitive to my environment and feel the energy that we exert on the world. He was very focused on emotions and taught me about processing my emotions and being able to express them in a factual way rather than judgmental way. But growing up, going to all these festivals, I had lots of people who acted as surrogate parents for me while my parents were dancing, or when I was rambling around, everyone was always keeping an eye on me. If anything, I was always a bit too watched, because I was always the English one in France. But the most memorable couple were a salsa dancing couple named Heidi and Mike Gibbs. I don't know if they know how influential they were on my life, but they were hilarious, and they taught me most of the jokes I still tell to this day. And one thing they specifically did was not apologise for who they were. Heidi would wear mismatched shoes on purpose because she liked how they looked. She would always wear one lime green dance shoe and one purple dance shoe. I always thought she looked awesome. She didn't understand why society said shoes had to match, and I could not agree with her more. And I've definitely embraced this mismatched shoe trend by wearing one black and one white Nike Air Force One shoe on each foot. And it pleases me how confusing and unsettling it is for other people to see me wearing shoes that according to them don't match. But to me, they feel the same, and therefore they are the same. So why do I make art? How has my style changed over time? Looking back, I now truly understand how I've forever used art to heal me. From expressing my anger by throwing balls of paint-soaked tissue paper at a large sheet of paper and painting angry, crying faces, to entering a meditative state as I make an automatic drawing in response to a song. I see the beauty in everything by approaching anything I look at as a piece of art. This has vastly helped me with my body image, as I have been able to employ my body as artwork that I layer paint onto to express my emotions. A world without art would be grey and lifeless, where we may as well all surrender to being the machines that capitalism is treating us as. I want to show the beauty in the world to everyone, in the hopes that their day will get a little better. For example, at the beginning of this year, I was part of an exhibition with the theme Rethink, Refund, Reboot, which kicked back against the UK government's heavily criticised and demeaning cyber-first advertising campaign, Rethink, Reskill, Reboot, which had the slogan, "Fatima's next job could be in cyber. She just doesn't know it yet." Super sinister and really not well thought out given the current climate and how affected the arts have been by all the cuts and closures during lockdown. To counter such negativity from the people running the country, I branded my body with the words non-essential, like the Extinction Rebellion protesters. I used post-its with nipples drawn onto them in biro as nipple covers to provide an element of satire and counter the censorship of the female nipple that I've had to in battle on Instagram that sexualizes my body unnecessarily. Using humour to cope with difficult situations is how I've survived this pandemic. I was inspired by an article that I used as the background of the collage. It was a graphic showing the results of a survey about paying essential workers more, but they also chose to show the top 5 non-essential jobs, for some reason that I'm still not quite sure of. And of course, artist was in the number 1 non-essential position. Even though art is a vital part of human nature, it's harder to monetize, and therefore it's not properly supported and funded by the government. Capitalism does not value the creative arts, because capitalism does not focus on the mental health of the humans it exploits. We are treated like machines in a society built for profit, and the detrimental effect on our mental health is undeniable. In this time of crisis and isolation, the role of art becomes more central to our lives, whether we realise it or not. We can easily take for granted the grand buffet of media that is available to us, leading to the irony of saying artists are non-essential, using a graphic created by one. I feel like a clown spending so much money studying fine art at university, only to be told by the government that I should retrain for a career in cyber. They've even just approved a 50% budget cut for university degrees studying art. What a joke. Anyway, the performance drawing medium is one that I'm only just dipping my toes into. Having reconnected with my intrinsic desire for dance during lockdown, the act of performing a mark has been a new development in my art practice, as I've become accustomed to where my values and passions lie. Bringing to life the energy that is released in the dance moves that I perform across a page has ignited a drive to create and continue to evolve. Last year I wrote a contemporary debates essay about the role of performance in drawing and the significance of the audience to the performed drawing, which was very challenging, because I had underestimated the vast number of artists already experimenting with all the ideas that I had been having about creating, thinking I was having nice original ideas. You know, nothing's original, like our teachers say. I've now understood how the audience is always present in some way, unless I'm literally drawing on my own with no camera or anybody seeing what I'm doing. I was filming time lapses of all of my lessons where I learnt the dance moves, or any time I was doing any form of dance related artwork, and I hadn't fully grasped what I was creating, even though now it seems so obvious to me that process as art is a valid medium through which to express one's thoughts and feelings, and if anything it gives a more well-rounded view and vision of what is actually happening. But it was all unconscious experimentation at first, and I really didn't have any idea what I was doing. So what does my work aim to do? What is it about? I use my body as a tool so that it becomes a mark-making device, like the painter's brush marking a surface. As I play music and perform an improvised dance in response to the sound, the beat, and the lyrics, I empty a combination of whatever I'm feeling in that particular moment on that particular day, with what the music makes me feel, into my marks to download the energy onto the page, and leave a trace of me there. I'm not quite sure how I pick the songs, other than that they need to make my body want to move, as if the melody, the beat, and the bass line were running through me. Anyone who has spent any time around me knows that if I like a song, I'm bopping along with my whole body. And if I can't feel it, I tend to like the tune less. Maybe it's something to do with the dopamine hit that my brain receives from a good beat that engages my neuroreceptors and brings me happiness. Who knows, I'm getting sidetracked. I've found that slower songs with more variety in the composition create less chaotic pieces of work because they force me to slow down and ground myself into the floor through my bare feet. I tend to spend a lot of my waking hours in my own little dream world, and the connection of my feet on the paper gives my body that sensory stimulation that wakes me up, so to speak, and connects my chaotic brain to the emotions that I am experiencing in that moment. It's something that I like about performance art. The ephemerality of the medium, due to the nature of a moment never existing again once it's gone, creates a powerful space within which to express and connect the artist with the audience in a shared moment of being. I use my body and my art to reclaim its strength and beauty for my own narrative. I focus on feeling through my creative process and allow my art to actually intentionally heal me rather than just unconsciously doing it. It's an incredibly vulnerable way to create work, but it guarantees the level of authenticity that I'm seeking to portray through my work. Can I isolate this to a single theme or concept? Of course not, it's me. But using my body to make art has led to a few key themes, all relating to the body, so I'm allowing it for myself. First, as a tool, the body becomes a mark-making device, like the painter's brush, marking a surface. The movements of the body are transferred onto a surface, leaving traces of the body. Second, as the subject, the body becomes the artwork in itself, like a finished painting. The body becomes the main focus point. And also, as an absence, the body is shown through traces of the objects it has altered, like the painter's studio, or the final drawing that I created with my body. The two themes, tool and subject, are interchangeable. For example, in a photo of me drawing using my body, it's both the tool and the subject of the image. Other themes that have come out of my practice are movement, mark making, energy being transferred onto the page, introspection, conscious movement, grounding, dance as therapy. Lots of others, I'm sure, but we'll stick with whatever I've just said right now. So who are my biggest artistic influences, and what is it about their work that I'm drawn to? Well, I have to acknowledge that it was the abstract expressionists Jackson Pollock from the US and the Gutai artists in Japan who were the first documented artists to move the canvas from the wall to the floor in the late 1930s, 1940s. I'm not good at dates. They wanted to remove any trace of the artist's hand in the work, so they threw paint at canvases or suspended themselves above canvases and kicked around a lump of paint across the surface with their feet. It was the French artist Yves Klein who in 1960 first used women's bodies as canvases, covering them in blue paint to study the impressions they made on paper while an orchestra played on. You know, the misogyny is real. Treating women as objects is real. We're going to move on from it because women like Carolee Schneemann would perform pieces where she would suspend herself naked in a piece called Up to and Including Her Limits that she performed I think 9 times between 1971 and 1976, eventually turning this piece into an installation. But the work is a record of the lines her suspended body made in space as she swung around, hanging from this harness, and moved up and down and across expansive sheets of paper placed on the walls and floor of the corner of a room. She would then leave the harness hanging there along with some videos of her performing the work along the sides of the installation. Of artists that are still alive, I'm inspired by Heather Hansen, Naomi Kendrick and Caroline de Nervaux, to name but a few. All 3 of these contemporary artists have attempted to face into the unknown whilst relaxing into themselves as they are. Heather Hansen seeks to empty gestures from one form to another while creating something new in the process, downloading her movement directly onto paper. Naomi Kendrick is trying to make visible the inner world that we all inhabit, and said in her blog, "I realised in a way this is exactly the thing to think about, to hold on to what's important to you, whilst enduring the whirlwind that surrounds us." She continues to say, "I like the idea of responding to, rather than attempting to translate or illustrate another art form. It's then a form of conversation, rather than a repetition." Caroline de Nervaux talks about her work by saying, "I just feel what is happening, and my body puts the sensation on paper." So how do I seek out opportunities? I'm actually terrible at this, and I'm hoping I will also learn from the guests that I bring onto this podcast on how to seek out opportunities better. Because most of the things I've done have happened because someone has approached me with an idea, and I have said yes. Now this has meant me saying yes to some very ridiculous ideas. The artwork for this podcast was from a photo shoot that I got a phone call about one Thursday afternoon in the 3 weeks that I happened to be in London. And they told me that I had won an opportunity for a free makeover and free photo shoot. I also thought it was a scam at first, but turns out it's totally legit. It was just a marketing thing and I got some awesome photos out of it. Having this open mindset to make the best of every situation that I'm in and seizing opportunities as they are presented has led to some of the most incredible experiences, and I can definitely thank my mum for that skill. So, if I were to describe a creative day in my life and ask myself when my favourite time to create was, not a single day in my life looks the same. Every single day is a new story. So I really wouldn't know how to answer this question. But I do know that in my life, how I do things is far more important than when I do them. I have zero concept of time, so unless I have a schedule written out, which I will most likely fail to remember exists, I will also most likely forget that plans could even exist because my mind is very much out of sight, out of mind. I've discovered this year that I like to spend time thinking and prepping for my upcoming work so that I don't encounter a problem that was avoidable during one of my performances. Does this mean I haven't encountered problems? Absolutely not. But you know, I've come a long way in my time. I would say that I start my day whenever I want to, but I'm more likely to wake up late and work till late than be an early bird in the studios. I quite often find myself being the last one in the studios at uni, and I love how peaceful it feels, because it's freeing to just be allowed to exist in a space designed for creativity without having to worry about people and the distractions that come with a vibrant studio culture. I find myself talking to all the other students all day until they've gone home, and then I focus on myself and make artwork because I can't focus when there are others around. I've always been far more interested in anybody else's life other than my own. But this year I've been making a big performance drawing every single Thursday and using my practice as research, as I have to set up cameras, staple paper to the ground. I've even recently had to prime the paper to reduce the absorbency before even doing the performance. So that's had to be done a couple days before to allow it to dry. If you don't know what primer is, it's just a very thin paint that is used to prep the surface so that the paint doesn't soak into the paper and is more workable on the surface. The joy of ADHD is that I have incredibly big ideas that could be amazing if I pull them off, but I'm not great at the doing. So this year I'm applying myself to the process of organising by learning. And genuinely, I've been trying to set up a big performance piece in one of the rehearsal rooms downstairs, and it has been the bane of my existence. But I have learnt how to prep and plan and work through the boring process of emailing all the administration, setting up the meetings, making a risk assessment, booking out all the equipment from the equipment store, attending meetings that could have been emails, encountering rejection, encountering support, ordering all the materials that I'll need, just so that I can do like 5. I probably won't even do more than that in the end because I'm so over it. This roll of paper. I bought a roll of paper that's 3.55 meters wide and 100 meters long. In retrospect, I should have probably bought a smaller roll of paper. But impulse control is lacking in the ADHD mind, so I'm just rolling with it at this point. In order to do the performances, I usually have to psych myself up for a while before at one point just clenching my ovaries and going for it, usually accompanied with some form of YOLO or fuck it mentality. I put the music on and I try to let myself enter the meditative state that is required to make these drawings. Once I'm dancing, I'm usually okay, because I'm usually totally enthralled by the work. But it's taken me a while to get to this point, and I remember trying to make my first one only in September now. My god, that's only been 2 months. And thinking about how I was so nervous back in the day. I'd never been authentic on camera. It felt so vulnerable to try and do that. I got made fun of a hell of a lot at school, and now I have a huge fear of being laughed at and a huge sensitivity to it, which I'm slowly working to let go of. Discovering I had ADHD, bearing in mind I only got diagnosed in June of 2020, illustrated how much I've been masking, and how what I thought was authenticity was actually me totally pretending to be a human being to fit into the world that is built for neurotypicals. Discovering what masking was and how automatic it was for me to just put on a face and be the person I thought everyone needed me to be so that I wasn't an annoyance, too loud, too impulsive, or just too much in general, made it really hard to take that mask off. I didn't know how or what to do to take that mask off at first, because it was like a safety blanket and no one would have to see the real me if I could just keep pretending. I've overcome that fear of being authentic by putting a pair of sunglasses on. Now hear me out. I constantly walk around with these sunglasses on, mainly because I have sensory issues, and bright fluorescent lighting from the outside world and from these studios, gives me headaches. So having sunglasses on means that I can remain a genuine nice person that is enjoyable to be around, rather than the suffering, frustrated and exhausted person having to deal with the fact that the world is too bright, on top of all of the other struggles that are also going on. But also because eyes are often described as the windows to the soul. And I've been told multiple times growing up that my eyes tell a story about the suffering I've endured, which I spent so many years masking. The sunglasses have an extra bonus of doubling as protection from outside judgment, because they are also polarized so that I can see out but no one can see in. It gives me this strength that I never realized I would have, because it's like putting on a mask without having to mask my personality. I've adopted the sunglasses as some form of trademark without completely knowing why. But something within me needs them right now. I don't know if they'll last and continue to be part of my practice, but they've made me feel a lot stronger, and I also like that whenever someone looks at me, they're faced with a reflection of themselves. The ultimate tool for deflection, no doubt. In my head, it's definitely mainly for the sensory issues, to keep me regulated, but I'm slowly starting to see and understand how powerful they have become to me and how vital they are to me creating work at the moment, while I feel really vulnerable and I come to terms with a lot of things about myself. As well as live performances, I document the process through video, and within the realm of possibilities that come with editing, I've explored overlaying 2 versions of me dancing the same song. I guess dancing the same song is a way of saying it. I've never said it like that before. Anyway, it kind of illustrates dancing with a ghost of myself, like the difference between the unrestricted movement in the dance that was used as a warm-up and the restriction caused by the drawing element in the second performance is interesting, as it somehow shows the restriction that masking forces me to adhere to every day. I'm still creating something great, but my movements are definitely nowhere near as gestural and as free as when I'm just dancing on my own on the page. I'm still figuring it all out, but I think it expresses the feeling that I'm trying to capture in the artworks, because the energy that is being released out of my body into the marks and into the work is so important. I mean, I think that also highlights why art therapy in general works, because getting those feelings out of your body and into the paper can allow for a much more physical release that feels really good when you're not feeling so great. I would recommend automatic drawing to anybody. Pick up a pencil and put one of your favourite songs on, or just a song that makes you feel something, and try to focus on the feelings that that song brings up for you. Then let those feelings guide your pencil to make marks. There is no right or wrong answer, as long as you're listening to yourself. Let your hand dance across the page to release the unconscious thoughts that are trapped inside you that might struggle to be released otherwise. And listen to what your body wants to release. Like the surrealist Salvador Dali once said, tap into the unconscious and pray it isn't boring. Finally, I'll ask how art is important to society or why it is. In my opinion, it provides hope and inspiration and joy to the viewer, and it allows people to express what they're feeling and convey dreams and things that aren't understood by the thinker but are still real. Without being able to express what we feel is real to those around us could be blind to dangers that we could have seen coming. I believe that coming together and refocusing our energy on human connection is the key to overcoming the slump that the creative industry has fallen into. As the country eases out of the socially distanced, isolated and virus-fearing reality that has become our normal, we need to reintegrate into the outside world and regain a sense of community, because human beings are social creatures that aren't built to survive alone. In my first year of art school, my dad gifted me a set of art oracle cards for Christmas, which instructs you to use the cards to seek creative and life inspiration from the great artists. Each card represents an artist and gives you 3 quotes that they followed for life, work and inspiration. In the taxi that took me to the recording studios at Shock Radio, I shuffled the cards and thought about this podcast, seeking maybe some form of validation or just inspiration for the day. And I ended up picking Grayson Perry's card out of the 50 cards in the deck. And this was significant because when I was first brainstorming this podcast, I discussed Grayson Perry's art club with my mum and was very much inspired by his work and the TV show, because it focused on bringing the public together and just embracing art from everyone without needing everything to be perfect. It really felt like a sign and inspired me to create hypothetical oracle inspiration from the artists that I interview. Grayson Perry's life quote is, "Scratch the surface until your fingers bleed." For his work, he says, "Meaning separates art and craft." For inspiration, he says, "Try something new, the old-fashioned way." So here I am at the end of my first ever podcast episode. Wow, I've been recording for a long time. Hopefully recording this podcast will become a lot easier for me, because now I get to ask the questions to other people and get to learn along with you all. I hope the next podcasts bring joy and insight to the multiple talented people to come. I thought it would be interesting to ask all the artists that I bring onto the show what their 3 quotes on their oracle card would be if they were represented in the deck that I have. So I'll start with mine. In life, don't let shame hold you hostage. In your work, relax into yourself as you are. For inspiration, creative becoming means sailing at the edge of not knowing. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, see you in the next one.